Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
if they want to open schools safely, they have an obligation to get the details right.
After a year of remote learning, high schools are set to reopen in less than 2 weeks, but the teachers union says the district should wait.
Foot pursuits are extraordinarily dangerous tactics.
The mayor's demanding changes to the Chicago Police Department policy for on-foot chases. The FOP responds.
If the Republicans want to dance, let's go. Let's go big on infrastructure.
Congress gears up for an infrastructure fight. Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in.
Learning more about who were the U.S. Capitol rioters on January 6th. A new report digs into the demographics of those arrested.
Will there ever be a return to normal for immunocompromised people? One medical professional shares his thoughts.
Tantrums, nightmares, and screen time, the effects of the pandemic on children's mental health.
Reflecting who our community is right now.
And how a Pilsen mural is documenting the neighborhood's history. But first, some of today's top stories. Illinois sees its highest single-day COVID total in 3 months. State public health officials report nearly 3,800 new cases in the last 24 hours and 28 additional deaths. That makes for a statewide total of 1.265 million cases and 21,423 deaths. The test positivity rate has risen now to 4.1%. Governor J.B. Pritzker says the upward trends mean that the bridge phase to a full reopen will remain on hold.
The number of hospitalizations is increasing. The number of cases of people going into ICU beds is increasing, and that's of great concern to us. So we want to make sure that before we reopen any further in the state, that we get that under control.
A 21-month-old boy shot in the head on Lakeshore Drive yesterday is in a coma, according to officials at Lurie Children's Hospital. They say the boy was put into an induced coma as doctors continued to operate on his brain. The boy was shot in an apparent road rage incident yesterday near Roosevelt Road on Lakeshore Drive. Police say they have questioned a person of interest in connection to the shooting. An LAPD sergeant testifies that video evidence shows Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin using deadly force by pressing his knee to George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes. Sergeant Jody Steiger served as a prosecution witness in Chauvin's trial, testifying that evidence shows Chauvin's use of force to be excessive. Chauvin is charged with murder and manslaughter in Floyd's death from May 25th of last year. Witness testimony is expected to continue tomorrow. High school teachers are expected back in their Chicago public school classrooms as soon as next week, and their students a week later. Though the Chicago Teachers Union and the district have been negotiating the terms of that reopen, the two sides haven't reached a deal, and the union is asking for more time. Brandis has more on this. Brandis, what are they asking for?
So, Paris, this morning the union said it's asking the district to delay that reopening by a week or more. The union says cases are on the rise, and as vaccine eligibility expands, why not allow more time to let more people get vaccinated, especially students and their families?
Our argument here is vaccinate everyone who's eligible to be vaccinated right now under the FDA rules. And if you could vaccinate 16-year-olds and up, and sort of address half the issue in high school, that's a real advantage.
Now, we know kindergarten through 8th grade students have been back in their school buildings for the last several weeks, learning in person in a hybrid schedule. But that's another concern the union has. How well is that working, they ask. The union says they'd like to see an assessment of what is working, what's not, before moving ahead with high schools. For example, membership has reported that the health screener needed before entering a CPS building sometimes fail and people aren't able to complete it online. The union is concerned about whether there are enough contact tracers and whether as many custodians as promised are being hired.
Brandis, as you know, the numbers of students going back for K through 8 lagged a little bit. What do we know about how many high school students are planning to return to in-person learning?
So, Paris, the latest data from CPS says that almost 26,000 students across the district plan to return. That's just 35% of high school enrollment. And the district points out that that can vary widely from school to school. Some have smaller enrollments, around 250. Others have thousands of students. Sin, which is the school you're looking at right here, has 1,500 students enrolled. Curie High School in Archer Heights has almost 3,000. The district has said because of those differences, it's allowing schools to figure out what an in-person return looks like for them with, of course, safety measures in place. But some teachers argue that's the problem.
Our students are going to be taking multiple buses. Many of our students are students in temporary living situations, meaning they're either unhoused or they move from home to home or they're doubled up. They're in vulnerable positions. Their family is in vulnerable positions. And the response we've gotten from the district is very much, well, you know, we'll let y'all figure it out. We'll let your schools figure it out.
These negotiations in the past have been very contentious. Has CPS given any indication that it is willing to agree to this delay that CTU is asking for?
Well, they have given an indication, and the answer is no. They're not willing to agree to it, Paris. The mayor was asked about this today, and she points to the agreement that the district reached with teachers to reopen schools a couple of months ago that lays out what conditions would warrant a closure to the classroom, the school, or the district level.
That's already baked into the plan, so we're going to follow the plan. There's no basis for us to renegotiate that. The terms are ones that were agreed to by the CTU just a matter of a few weeks ago. I see no basis for delay, and it's my expectation that we're going to be opening up high schools as indicated by CPS.
Now, the mayor went on to say that she is in touch with Chicago Public Health Commissioner Allison Arwoody multiple times a day regarding the city's rising case rates, and she sees nothing that would trigger a closure. And actually, late this afternoon, we did receive a statement from CDPH Health Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwoody. That's not it on the screen, but basically, Dr. Arwoody says that based on the current data, there's no reason to delay the opening of schools, but that with recent increases in COVID cases, that's largely been driven by young adults aged 18 to 39, not those who are under the age of 18. Now, I will say the district also sent us a statement as well that says, quote, while our discussions with CTU have been productive, it is disheartening to see yet again that CTU is choosing to create uncertainty for families and their own members when they know and privately agree that our high schools are safe and prepared to open. CPS also points to its March board meeting where they announced intentions to prioritize vaccinations for students over age 16 after staff vaccinations, and that they are working with CDPH on that plan. Meanwhile, Paris CTU President Jesse Sharkey says he plans to have a union-wide discussion on negotiations tomorrow, and they expect bargaining will probably continue into the weekend. Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Just who were the people that stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th? A new analysis by University of Chicago's Project on Security and Threats dug into the demographics of the 377 individuals who were arrested for the Capitol attack. And the study's author says he had expected to discover something about the economic conditions of the rioters, but was surprised that the data told a very different story. Joining us to discuss his findings is University of Chicago political science professor Robert Pape, who serves as director of the school's Chicago Project on Security and Terrorism and lead investigator on this report. Professor Pape, welcome back as always. So your last study looked at some of the financial conditions of some of the rioters. This study looked at demographics and where they came from. What did you find?
Well, we found something very different than what we were initially expecting. So Paris, I started this coming as a professor from reading a lot of the studies and doing studies on political violence around the world, where economic factors play a role. Well, that led me to expect economic factors may play a role here. But right off the bat, when we look at the 377, and with this large research team of 20 people, we can examine all the court documents. We can systematically study thousands of pages of material. We see that almost 45% are CEOs, business owners, come from white-collar occupations like doctors, attorneys, accountants. Well, if 45% are coming from that kind of economic background, you can see poverty is really not likely to be. And so that opened our eyes. That's the beauty of social science. It can tell you things that you didn't expect, and then you can go further.
And you can conclude that economics isn't really the primary driver here. And let's take a look at the map that you produced of where the alleged insurrectionists come from. You know, heavy amount in Texas, Pennsylvania, New York, Florida, but county by county, you looked at trends and which counties they came from, and what did that tell you?
That's right. So we started to look at the counties, and what we discovered is, first, over half come from counties that Biden won. And that means we also know they're coming from urban areas. Then we did statistical analysis, and it turns out the more urban the area, the less likely was a county to have an insurrectionist related to Capitol Hill on January 6th.
The more rural the area, you mean?
The more rural the area, the less likely. We also looked at percent Trump vote, and the more Trump vote, the less likely was a county to send an insurrectionist. Striking, because many people would think, well, the more rural, the more vote for Trump. No, that's not it. The key factor that we found was the counties that lost the most white population, that is non-Hispanic white population, since 2015, were far more likely to send an insurrectionist. And that's a finding that would hold by chance fewer than, by chance, 1 in 1,000 times. So you can't get that by just flipping a coin. This is an extremely robust finding, Paris.
So as a social scientist...
we controlled for population size. We controlled for unemployment rate. We controlled for distance to Washington, D.C. So what this factor that jumps out at us tells us is that this is probably has something to do with the fear of the Great Replacement. And that's why we did another study. So
when you say great replacement, though, what does that mean? And as a social scientist, are you saying that the conclusion here is that the rioters that you found were driven by racial resentment or racial anxiety and not necessarily economic?
We're finding evidence that the key driver is fear that the rights of Hispanic people and Black people are outpacing the rights of white people. That's what we mean by the Great Replacement. And the county level analysis that I just discussed is point number one, but we went further. We conducted a nationally representative sample of all Americans with the National Opinion Research Council at the University of Chicago. This is one of the most respected polling agencies in the world. We did a gold standard survey, and what we discovered was that 4% of Americans believe that both the election was stolen in 2020 and would participate in a violent protest. That's 10 million people, Paris.
That's a lot of people.
We further studied that right there is, we need to take this seriously, which is why people like former Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson here this is getting a lot of people's attention. Then further, we further analyzed the risk factors. And again, the risk factor that jumped out in our survey was the belief that the rights of Hispanic people and Black people are outpacing the rights of whites.
So multiple data points that you're finding here, that racial resentment, racial anxiety is the main driver here. And as you're saying, you know, talking about beefing up security, intelligence, that's not going to be enough. So what can policymakers take away from this study on a practical level to deal with this?
That this is rooted in social change. This is rooted in our society. And what that means is we need top academic experts to work with top policy practitioners with our government together to do more work to thicken up the understandings that we now have and to develop creative policy initiatives. This is not going to be solved, Paris, by a quick reach to a jobs program or a quick shoot from the hip solution. This is serious because this is pointing to quite a volatile 2022 election season and more violence against minorities. So we need to take this seriously, and it needs to become a national priority.
A landmark study here, and given your work studying national security and extremism in the Middle East, I'm sure that public officials and other stakeholders are going to be paying attention to this. And thank you, as always, for joining us.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Paris. Thanks for having me.
And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, Chicago police have yet to release footage of the March 29th police shooting of 13-year-old Adam Toledo. The mayor says she's frustrated that it hasn't been made public yet. However, Toledo's death has spurred calls for changes to the Chicago Police Department's policy on pursuits like the one during which Toledo was shot. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Yeah, Brandis, there is a lot of pain, anger, and questions surrounding the circumstances that led a Chicago police officer to shoot the teen, ultimately killing Adam Toledo. Police say that there had been an armed confrontation after Toledo and a man that he was with ran from officers. They were on the scene after technology detected gunfire nearby in Little Village. On Monday, Mayor Lightfoot ordered the CPD to enact a new foot pursuit policy before summer.
We cannot and will not push the foot pursuit policy reform off for another day.
The ACLU of Illinois' legal director says by their very nature, foot pursuits are dangerous.
They involve officers chasing people through the streets that are often crowded, sometimes at night, in conditions that are difficult, with adrenaline running through their systems. And this is the kind of context that can lead to excessive force, and too often does lead to excessive force.
Chases on foot have been scrutinized for years, including by the Department of Justice investigation that led to the consent decree that is right now supposed to be governing the CPD's conduct. Georgie says the DOJ was explicit in its findings that the CPD's reliance on foot pursuits has been unsound and unnecessary. Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul says that the consent decree covers foot chases in detail.
It mandates training. It mandates data collection on foot pursuit, and it empowers the monitor to mandate a foot pursuit policy after assessment of the data.
He says that data assessing is happening. The most recent report by that independent monitor overseeing the CPD's compliance with the consent decree found that the CPD's foot pursuits have increased that have resulted in the use of deadly force. The monitor also calling for the CPD to adopt a true formal policy on foot pursuits. Right now, the department has none.
What the department has currently is a training bulletin. So right off the bat, it's really important that the department adopt a formal policy with respect to foot pursuits. Policies are more formal guidance for officers. They have supervisory implications. They have accountability implications.
Head of Chicago's police union, John Catanzara, has some ideas on what a new policy should look like.
Well, I would hope the policy starts with a very clear message. Comply with police lawful orders to stop, to drop a weapon, to stop running, to give up, surrender, whatever the case may be.
Now, advocates who've been calling for reform have ideas too. They say that the new policy needs to include guidance for police, even on when a police officer should and should not pursue a suspect on foot.
And importantly, related to that, when a foot pursuit should end, when to stop the chase should be important. Guidance about the fact that merely running away, flight alone, should not be sufficient justification to engage in a foot pursuit.
Now, Catanzara says that this focus, the emphasis on a new policy is an example of, quote, blaming the police. He says, like, they are the ones doing something wrong, when in fact, he says it is the criminals who are in the wrong. Imagine a scenario, he says, that could lead to a chase.
You pull up on a subject. By the time you rifle through in your head all the do's and don'ts of that new policy that would come out, the offender is going to be long gone. It's a joke. It makes no sense. Law enforcement is instantaneous action quite often, more times than not. So what do you think you're going to do? All you're doing is giving the criminals of this city more breathing room to not only now they know they just drive away and we're not going to chase them in a vehicle. Now they know just run away and we're not going to chase them on foot. How are you ever going to catch a criminal responsible for crime? Ever, with this policy and this whole mindset.
Now, the CPD training bulletin, just revised in February, does address a variety of factors like partner splitting, if a suspect is believed to be armed, if there are other options that an officer can do besides pursuing a suspect on foot, and says that when engaging in a foot pursuit, department members will assess the risks to the public, to themselves, and to the fleeing subject. Whether the officer in the Toledo incident was right to have pursued the suspects on foot, Attorney General Raul says he can't say. He hasn't seen the video and he doesn't know the details.
What I do know, as we discussed earlier, that whether or not a policy on foot pursuits is adopted should not hinge upon a tragic situation. It should be something that is proactively done.
Advocates like the ACLU's Shahudri agrees this could have been done before.
This is a serious issue precisely because there are so many different police tactics that interface with the use of force in ways that can hurt people on the ground, and lives are at stake.
Advocates say that going forward, as the CPD does develop this new policy in coming weeks, that what needs to happen is the CPD has to involve community organizations and particularly communities of color in the development. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. Chicago children's mental and emotional health has been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. That is the finding of researchers at Lurie Children's Hospital who surveyed 1,500 parents across the city about the impact of the pandemic on their children's behavior. Among the key findings, almost half of all of the parents spoke to their child's primary care provider about mental health concerns. 24% said their child had used mental or behavioral services over the past year, but 18% said they were unable to access such services for their child. Joining us now to tell us more is Dr. Matthew Davis, director at Lurie Children's Hospital's Stanley Mann Children's Research Institute. He co-authored this report. Dr. Davis, thank you for joining us. So what are some of the behavior changes that parents reported in your survey?
When we asked parents about what sort of symptoms they were noticing, we had the highest proportion of parents who said their kids were having more tantrums than they'd been having prior to the pandemic. They were having sleep problems, including nightmares and trouble falling asleep. And they were also experiencing more difficulty getting along with their peers. Some kids were even having symptoms such as headaches and stomach aches. And all of these are common things we see in pediatrics when kids who don't have the language yet to describe their emotions are instead expressing those emotions through their behaviors.
Did any of the findings surprise you or confirm what you suspected as a physician?
These types of concerns that parents are raising in our report are certainly the types of reports that I've had from parents in my own clinic at the Uptown Clinic as part of Lurie Children's Network. But I think what we're learning from this report is just how common these concerns are. To have half of parents in Chicago say that they've sought primary care provider support for their children's behavioral health needs during the pandemic is quite a remarkable number. And we estimate if we apply that to 2 to 11-year-olds across the city, we're talking about new behavioral health needs for over 70,000 children.
So a ballooning, it sounds like. Your report also shows how children's activities changed during the pandemic. Not surprisingly, they are spending less time in person with their friends. They are doing less physical activity. They are sleeping more, spending more time on screens. How do these changes impact a child's emotional and mental health?
The first thing to recognize about the pandemic is what we all know from our own experience, and that is how incredibly disruptive it has been to the normal routines we had before. So the changes that you're describing are some of the most common activities that kids have every day. And that amount of change, that amount of disruption is very unsettling to most children. And although many kids, in fact, most kids have a lot of resilience in them, the amount of disruption in their lives and the lives of the adult caregivers in their lives, with parents, grandparents, aunties, and uncles, has really been tremendous. It's hard to imagine a more severe disruption than what this pandemic has caused.
What are your concerns for children who may have already had existing behavioral challenges before the pandemic? Perhaps children with autism especially. Have they been exacerbated?
Brandis, that is a particular group that we're concerned about in the pediatric community, because we know before the pandemic that we are working hard to try to support the needs of families concerned about the behavioral symptoms that their children were having, whether it be autism spectrum disorder or other concerns. Because of the disruption of the pandemic that we were just mentioning, the regular routines that are really vital to helping children with behavioral health needs cope with that daily, those daily goals that they have along with their families have also been blocked or obstructed in some key ways. And that's been really a challenge for those kids and for their families. What that's leading to across the country, certainly here in Chicago and in many other locations as well, is a need for hospital level care for some children whose behavioral health needs have really increased during the pandemic, even though we've been trying very hard in the outpatient setting to manage them.
A struggle for those families, I'm sure. We also know that the pandemic has hit Black and brown communities the hardest. What differences did you notice for children who are of color and low-income families?
Of course, that's an essential consideration here in Chicago. And at Lurie Children's, we've been working on reaching out to the communities of color with our peer institutions across the city to make certain that the coping strategies with COVID-19 are brought to the communities, not asking the communities to come and find those strategies. When we ask parents from all the 77 community areas of Chicago about the behavioral health needs of their children, what's really striking is that all parents have experienced this in a very similar way. So this is not something that, like COVID-19 itself, has disproportionately affected communities of color. This is something that's affecting all families.
You mentioned some of the behavior challenges that younger kids are exhibiting, but what about teenagers, and how might the signs of distress differ for an older group of children?
Brandis, that's a great question, and something that we see in pediatrics frequently is if teens can express those feelings, if they're comfortable doing that, they often will express how much distress they're having. But if they're not as comfortable expressing that, then what we may see instead is withdrawing from family relationships or from really well-established friendships. We may see changes in eating and sleeping behaviors, and we may see acting out, even in the older age kids, in ways that are unfamiliar to their families.
In about the 30 seconds that we've got left, Dr. Davis, what advice do you have for parents? Where can they go for help if they think they need it?
One of the reassuring parts of these findings is that we saw so many parents reaching out to their children's primary care providers. They are the first line of support. Our behavioral health specialist companions here in the city are a vital part of the teamwork as well. And parents who are in distress should know that they are not alone, and there are many resources. There's the NAMI, N-A-M-I, Chicago Helpline. There's the crisis text line. You text HOME to 741-741. Or in cases of extraordinary distress, you can reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK.
Okay. Dr. Matthew Davis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, recounting a neighborhood's history with the help of a mural. Stick around.
There's much more ahead on the program, including what a return to normal could look like for those with weakened immune systems. But first, public art has become synonymous with Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood. A new mural on 18th Street is using the medium to preserve the community's history and to memorialize nearly 50 of its residents.
Lizette Garza's family has lived in Pilsen for 3 generations. She's a community organizer in the neighborhood. And she's one of 46 residents featured on a new mural.
There's a lot of important significance is putting down historical roots, what it means for cultural heritage.
Artists Pablo Serrano and Mateo Zapata created the 4,000 square foot painting. It's named Somos Pilsen, which means we are Pilsen.
The mural is just a quick snapshot of a community in motion, right? And part of that motion is an affirmation of the things that bring us together.
The mural is on the western side of Carnitas Don Pedro on Pilsen's 18th Street, a community staple. The late Don Pedro opened the restaurant in 1981. The Duarte family commissioned the mural, which is also in honor of Pedro. The artists say the community members speak to the variety of experiences in the neighborhood.
Being someone who grew up here for, 30 plus years, I recognize everybody on there, and I understand, the roles they play.
Marcus is Marion Sims' son, right? So Marion Sims was one of the first black families to move into Pilsen, early 60s.
Zapata says the mural is a way to solidify the community's history in the face of gentrification and displacement.
The mural is an attempt to make sure that the history from all the work that older generations have put in the neighborhood and younger generations are starting to step up to put in the neighborhood isn't erased.
Somos Pilsen features essential workers, musicians, and business owners. One community leader featured on the mural is Concepcion Rodriguez, known to many as Concha. She's lived on the same street since 1967. Rodriguez has continued her late brother's work of discouraging youth from joining gangs.
I have letters of kids writing to me, telling me that they thanked me because they were able to get out of a gang because of my brother and myself.
Rodriguez is known to some Pilsen residents as the Death Lady. She visits schools and community events to talk about the dangers of joining gangs. She brings articles about young people who have died of gang violence and a coffin with a mirror inside.
For that individual to look in there and see the reflection. That if you're in a gang, this is where you're going to end up. If you're thinking about being a gang, joining a gang, don't do it.
Somos Pilsen is also an opportunity to show young people a positive representation of their community.
There's a certain level of power in controlling your own narrative. And it's been too often that immigrants are represented as criminals, whether it be in the media or whether it be by conservative politics. And it's up to us to change that.
Seeing all those individuals, seeing Angela Miller, seeing a Teresa Fraga, seeing Don Pedro up there, looking at it, I'm proud of it because these are the Latinos that have made a difference, not just in this community, but in society.
And while public art is common in Pilsen, Zapata says he hopes the mural inspires other communities to leverage art to empower residents. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, preliminary research shows the vaccine is not as effective on immunocompromised people, so will there ever be a return to normal?
Not tomorrow, but now.
And our Spotlight Politics team has more on the mayor's call to change the Chicago Police Department's foot pursuit policy. But first, some more of today's top stories. A group of Chicago Amazon employees walked off the job today. The employees work at the mega online retailer's Gage Park Distribution Center and are calling on the company to stop understaffing the facility and to accommodate people working 10.5-hour overnight shifts. Amazon told WTTW News it respects employees' rights to voice their concerns, says the company is making changes to its schedules to create more full-time shifts. There's much more on this story on our website. And Chicago's most notorious lovebirds are getting an expanded home. The Chicago Park District today voted to expand a protected area of the Montrose Dune Natural Area at Montrose Beach, the nesting home of the piping plover pair, Monty and Rose. Conservationists call the 3.1-acre expansion a huge win and say other shorebirds regularly spend time on their migratory routes at the shelter throughout the year, as you see Monty and Rose engaging in their courtship. And there's more on this story on our website as well. A new Johns Hopkins study finds that fewer than 20% of organ transplant patients generated an antibody response to the first dose of the COVID vaccine. That preliminary study raises questions about vaccine protection for not only those patients, but for others with weakened immune systems. That also includes people with HIV, AIDS, cancer patients, people taking medications for rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel disease, and people on steroids, among others. And joining us to talk about the COVID vaccine and people with a compromised immune system is Dr. Michael Angarone, Associate Professor of Medicine and Infectious Diseases at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. Dr. Angarone, thanks for being here. So this study, only around 20% effectiveness after the first shot in immunosuppressed patients versus 85 to 95% in healthy patients. What does this mean about the efficacy of the vaccine in those patients?
Well, thanks for having me here, and that's an important question. And this study really looked at just the response to the vaccine with antibody levels after the first dose. And so we don't really know how efficacious or less efficacious the vaccine will be, but it does kind of raise our concern for those people who are immune suppressed or immune compromised. May they not respond as well to the vaccine and still be at risk for acquiring coronavirus infection?
And we mentioned who fell into those categories. So what would you anticipate a study after the second dose showing?
So we're hoping that after that second dose, we're going to see an increase in the numbers or the percentage of individuals that have an antibody response. And then I think more importantly, looking at how many of those individuals become infected with coronavirus, whether or not they develop the antibody. So we know that there's other arms of the immune system that protect us, and antibodies are just one marker of that.
And is this true with other vaccines, say the flu vaccine, that is less effective in immunosuppressed individuals?
Yes, and that's one of the things that we've been worried about, is that when we look at other vaccines, we know that people with immune suppressed conditions or on medications that suppress the immune system, they don't respond as well to other vaccines, influenza, pneumonia, hepatitis B, etc.
Does this mean that immunosuppressed individuals might want to wait before getting vaccinated or shouldn't be in such a hurry to do so?
I think we still should promote getting vaccines for everyone, including those that are immune suppressed. So this study does not tell us that it's not safe. The vaccine was safe in these individuals. This study just tells us that the immune response, or that immune globulin response, was less. But we still want our immune suppressed individuals to get vaccinated. We want their family, the people that they're around, to get vaccinated. This study does not mean that we should halt or slow down the vaccine rollout for those immune suppressed individuals.
And say that further studies show that indeed immune suppressed individuals don't respond to the vaccine the same way that healthy individuals do. What does that mean for return to normal for them? Does that mean they might have to be quarantined longer, wear masks longer than the general population?
And that might be what we have to do. We might have to start thinking about those individuals. That's one of the reasons behind, even after immune competent individuals or the general public get vaccinated, that we still are promoting wearing a mask and distancing until the pandemic really gets under control. We don't know who's immune suppressed. And so those people that we're around every day might be immune suppressed. So we need to protect them. They need to protect themselves. And they may indeed need to wear masks and distance and kind of take those precautions for longer than the rest of us, or start thinking about the different things that they're getting involved with a little bit differently, at least until the pandemic gets under control and we get more information about how good these vaccines work or how poorly they work in immune suppressed individuals.
Or does it mean that the general population might have to keep restrictions in place and mask wearing in place, depending on how big a percentage of the population we're talking about that is immunosuppressed?
Yeah, we don't know. So the population that's immune suppressed is large. It's not enormous, but I think that's where kind of the messaging of all of us, even after we get the vaccine, should still wear masks when we're in a public place, or we're in a restaurant or a supermarket, or other places where we're around other people. If everyone that we're seeing in our family is vaccinated, including ourselves, and we're immune suppressed, that math starts to change a little bit, or that discussion starts to change, because you know that everyone is vaccinated and protected. But I think when just thinking about the general public, I think that's where we have to really promote still protecting everyone else that's around us, including the most vulnerable among us, which are the immune suppressed individuals.
So things like mask wearing might have to stick around for a long time. And public health officials talk about this, you know, the dangers of COVID symptoms in folks that are immunosuppressed. Is there definitive evidence that, say you are one of the individuals that we mentioned at the top, that you have a higher probability of perhaps contracting more severe COVID symptoms?
There are growing studies and more information about these individuals. And what we are finding is that, yes, individuals who fall in these immune compromised categories are at higher risk of being hospitalized, more severe symptoms from this infection, more likely to be in the ICU. And so we're getting more of that information. And yes, those people are at high risk of developing more severe infection.
Because you see public health officials talking about possibly reopening, getting back to normal in the summer. Might public health officials have to rethink that whole calculus when considering whatever future studies might show about immunosuppressed people?
We might, and I think that's where getting more data is going to help us. I think just even looking at the number of cases and how many of those cases might be breaking through vaccine, or the number of cases that might be due to these variants. So this is always going to be a moving target. And that's where I think you have to be really cautious about setting firm dates or time periods where we're going to get back to normal. I think we have to take into consideration everyone, including these individuals that are immune suppressed.
So much still to learn about COVID-19 and the vaccination. All right, Dr. Michael Angaroni, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And up next, our Spotlight Politics team takes a look at Chicago's expanded vaccine eligibility. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Vice President Kamala Harris makes her first trip to Chicago since taking office. Mayor Lori Lightfoot says the city will follow new federal guidelines to make the COVID vaccine available to all adults this month. Plus, how officials are responding to a string of shootings, Congress gears up for an infrastructure fight, and a new public official is reportedly facing federal investigation. Here with all of that and more, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. So, guys, Vice President Kamala Harris, we know that she came to town yesterday to promote the Biden administration's COVID recovery efforts and the vaccination campaign. But a press conference with local politicians following her visit, Heather, was left marred by a bit of confusion. You were there. What happened?
It was very strange. So first of all, Vice President Harris was never scheduled to appear in front of the news media alongside Lori Lightfoot or other Chicago officials, which is pretty typical when such a high-profile Democrat comes to town. Instead, Senators Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, along with Lori Lightfoot and Governor J.B. Pritzker, were scheduled to hold a press conference nearby the vaccination site that the vice president toured. However, the mayor and the governor never arrived. Now, the governor says that the mayor's team told him that the press conference was canceled. And the mayor said that, well, it started before she got there because she had a one-on-one conference with the vice president. So she decided to reschedule it for about 90 minutes later at City Hall. But what was really sort of, piquing everybody's interest was the fact that the original site of the press conference was besieged by protesters who were chanting anti-Lightfoot, anti-police slogans, and they were incensed by the death of 13-year-old Adam Toledo, who was killed by police about a week ago. So it was a very unusual press conference. Now, when we made it back to City Hall, I asked the mayor, hey, did you cancel the press conference because of the protesters, or were you still peeved with Governor Pritzker for signing 2 bills that you vehemently opposed? And she said, no, it was just logistics. But that is not how a vice presidential visit to a city is supposed to work.
Now, Amanda, let's get to those bills because some observers are wondering if there's a little bit of tension between the two because Mayor Lightfoot opposed those 2 bills that the governor signed. Amanda, what were they?
So these are bills. For one of them gives more power to the Chicago Teachers Union. constantly that CTU, as just you reported tonight, Brandes, very much at odds with both the school district as well as in general the Lightfoot administration, and of course had endorsed Lightfoot's opponent, Tony Preckwinkle. I'm going to get back to that in just a second in the mayor's race. The other measure is going to basically be a bigger financial burden for the city because it increases the pension benefits that a certain group of Chicago firefighters are going to receive. Always difficult when you have first responders involved, their retirement benefits. But again, bottom line here, city doesn't have getting money from the feds, but still in a very difficult financial position. And so this is going to add to the city's budget. So those are the two bills. And it does seem that even if both sides say, hey, we get along, that relations are at the very least frosty. And then on top of that, Brandes, we just got word a bit ago that under the leadership of Cook County Democratic Party leader Tony Preckwinkle, that committee people have endorsed bills that are before the General Assembly right now that would pave the way for an elected Chicago school board. These are proposals that Mayor Lightfoot, again, opposes. And instead, you have the Democratic Party's big leaders here all endorsing an elected school board. So yet again,
and the mayor has said that she does,
where she wants, where she wants.
She has said that she does support an elected school board, but not the particular measures that we've seen in Springfield. Now, President Biden yesterday said all adults in the U.S. should be eligible for the coronavirus vaccine on April 19th. The city says it will follow suit, even though it has been moving slower than other municipalities. Here's Dr. Allison Arwoody.
The only hesitation has just been vaccine supply, and we are not seeing the huge increases, partly because of the Johnson & Johnson issues with manufacturing that came to play. But I remain confident. I think talking to the group this morning, they have made every commitment to keep building vaccine, and as we expand eligibility, I think we're going to have demand here for a long time.
So, Paris, why has Chicago been expanding eligibility more slowly than other parts of the state?
Well, Mayor Lightfoot said yesterday that the city will be open to all adults who want the vaccine starting April 19th, going along with President Biden's demand there. Although, as you heard Dr. Arwoody said, it's because the city still is not seeing enough vaccine to meet the demand, especially given other areas of the state where you hear there are surpluses. And certainly Chicago residents can go outside of the city, can go to other places if they're so able to get vaccinated because, and as Mayor said, even though all adults will be eligible April 19th, it doesn't mean that they're going to be able to get an appointment. You might hear more stories of headaches on websites, of websites freezing, of not being able to get that appointment. So, and Mayor Lightfoot said yesterday that she spoke with the vice president about that. And the vice president, her only real statement around this issue was, well, the state of Illinois is getting more vaccines, and then it's going to be up to the state to distribute it to Chicago.
Now, as we heard earlier in the show, after the killing of 13-year-old Adam Toledo, Mayor Lightfoot this week called for a new policy on Chicago police foot pursuits, calling it something that needs urgent action.
Not tomorrow, but now. Foot pursuits present a significant safety issue, officer safety, but also community safety for the pursued and for bystanders. And CPD engages in hundreds of foot pursuits annually and many every single day.
Amanda, you covered this for us tonight. What are some of the proposed changes and how difficult might they be to get through?
Well, I mean, this will presumably be happening in short order here. That said, subject to change, there's the consent decree that is overseen by an independent monitor as well as a judge. Depends on how much engagement the CPD is going to have with community organizations, some of which already have some steadfast thoughts, but there's most certainly a groundswell of desire among vocal advocates and activists who say, no, listen to us, you need to be on the ground having conversations, not just listening to even the ACLU, but really talking to individuals who are mostly impacted, particularly communities of color in Chicago, where they feel besieged more, and why we have this consent decree in the first place, because of use of force that is seen more in those communities. I do think that you are going to see things such as as we heard earlier, a limit on how long these police chases should go, what police need to consider in terms of the environment they're in, who else is around, whether they're going to be able to get at a suspect or catch up with the individual they want to pursue at a different time or opportunity versus chasing them.
Now, Paris, there have been several high-profile shootings in recent days, including the 21-month-old shot in the apparent road rage incident on Lakeshore Drive. What have you been hearing from police and city officials?
Well, what police say so far is they have questioned someone in connection with that, a person of interest. Beyond that, very little. I mean, they don't believe it was gang-related. They do believe it was a road rage, isolated incident like that. We're really not hearing a whole lot on the homicide rate in general, which, again, it was a pretty bad weekend over Easter, and you're seeing numbers this year that outpace last year, which was a particularly bad year. And if it continues in this trend in terms of homicides and shootings, it's going to be up there with some of the record high years of 30-plus years ago, which is something that no public official wanted. Nobody wants. No one thought that they would see. And obviously there's so many complicated factors that lead to gun violence, but you're not hearing a lot from the police department right now about what their plan is for the summer, why is there a spike this year, and what they plan to do about it.
And Heather, this all comes amid, this drawn-out battle over police reform, specifically proposals for civilian oversight of the police. Where does all of that stand, this whole process?
In limbo, where it's been for the better part of the last 2 years. And I think many people thought that the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis police custody and the protests that generate would give new life to this. And certainly there are new proposals. There's now a unified proposal from community members that would put an elected board in charge of the Chicago Police Department. But it is opposed by Mayor Lightfoot. And she has said that she will introduce her own version of an elected board, but it's not clear when that proposal will come from the mayor or whether it could win enough support from the city council to pass. And that was really something that's left undone from the last major Chicago police scandal, which was, of course, the murder of Laquan McDonald. And this was a centerpiece of those reform efforts that it just has not happened because it's such a contentious issue while the police department is grappling with such an intense spike in violence, along with all of the other political issues that the mayor and the city council are facing.
And Heather, also, so the latest elected official caught up in this wide-ranging federal corruption probe of Illinois politics is Cook County Commissioner Luis Arroyo Jr., who WBEZ reports was subpoenaed earlier this year. Now, his father, a former state lawmaker, was indicted on bribery charges in 2019. What did we learn from this report?
Well, WBEZ reported that the federal prosecutors subpoenaed his tax records. Now, like many other elected officials, Luis Arroyo Jr. lobbies other elected officials. So he is a registered lobbyist to lobby the General Assembly. That's totally legal. And it's not clear what the feds were looking for or, of course, what they found, but it is part of this swirling corruption around lobbying and cross-lobbying. And there are many proposals that would make it illegal, but none of them have gained enough traction to get through the General Assembly. And, of course, I should mention that Luis Arroyo Jr.'s wife was a lobbyist for ComEd, which, of course, we've talked about extensively. And his father is awaiting trial on charges that he essentially bribed a state senator for a client of his lobbying firm. So this will turn up the pressure on state officials who are still grappling with whether to pass ethics reforms. But it does remind us all that the feds are out there serving subpoenas and we don't know what they're doing, although, of course, they're welcome to call any or all of us to let us know what they're doing.
And up the pressure on his dad, I think, too.
Absolutely.
Now, Paris, yesterday you spoke with members of the Illinois congressional delegation, including a Senate maneuver that will let them take up President Biden's infrastructure without having to deal with the filibuster. How contentious is this process expected to be?
It's going to be very contentious. Looks like it's going to fall down along the lines of what constitutes infrastructure, because infrastructure is typically very popular on a bipartisan basis, but Republicans messaging on that as well. There's certain things in there that shouldn't shouldn't be infrastructure, like healthcare infrastructure or electric charging stations, and then it'll fall down on how to pay for it. Democrats want, a rise in the corporate income tax from 21 to 28%. But don't be surprised, even if reconciliation is used, which now we know it can be on this, where just Democrats pass this on a party line vote, don't be surprised with the possible return of earmarks that Republicans stick some things in there for their district, vote against it, and then if the bill passes, they go have a little press conference and ribbon cutting at a new bridge in their district, as these things tend to go.
I think they call that pork. Amanda, we've got 30 seconds left. Wasn't election day in Chicago, but there were some suburban races in Chicagoland. 1 to 2 races that caught your eye.
Well, so again, just referring back to that corruption scandal, you do have one of the individuals who has been charged with accepting a bribe from an executive of the red light company Safe Speed. That is Lou Presta, appears to have won yet another term for Crestwood. Chris Getty in Lyons, not been charged, denies any wrongdoing, but Lyons Village Hall was raided, and he again appears to win. You saw some, however, incumbent mayors fall down. So I would say the key is really low turnout. That's the commonality.
All right. Thanks, as always, to the Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. And you can find much more about the stories discussed tonight with our Spotlight Politics team by visiting our website. While you're there, check out the story on the Chicago Park District's decision to expand the Montrose Dune area for piping plovers Monty and Rose. It's all at WTTW.com/news. They're Paris's best friends, Monty and Rose are. That's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing, and you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website.
Well, if I'm the best friend, I'm the third wheel, because their romance is quite evident.
Awkward.
There, but it's good to expand their love nest, so to speak. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app, and please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.